Welcome to Peptide-Proof, your source for rigorous, independent, evidence-based peptide intelligence. Today, we're looking at Argireline. We're breaking down the exact molecular mechanics of this peptide to see what the clinical data actually proves about its ability to smooth expression lines. Let's get right to it.
So can a topical serum really mimic Botox? To figure that out, we first have to look at the problem we're trying to solve. You see, not all wrinkles are created equal. Static wrinkles, those are etched in by collagen loss and sun damage. But dynamic wrinkles, like crow's feet or those stubborn forehead lines, are totally different. They show up because the muscles under your skin are pulling the surface into a crease every single time you smile, squint, or frown. Over the decades, that muscle memory becomes structural. So the big question here is whether a topical serum packed with a 6-amino acid peptide can actually block that muscle signal and relax those lines, completely needle-free. If you were online in 2022, you might have noticed a massive spike in searches for Botox in a bottle. It actually racked up more searches in that 1 year than in the previous decade combined. What everyone was looking for was Argireline. Technically known as Acetyl Hexapeptide-8, this isn't just some watered-down Botox imitation. As you'll see, it's a precision-engineered fragment of a protein called SNAP-25, and the science explaining how it softens expression lines from the outside in is actually incredibly solid.
Here's our roadmap for today's explainer. First, the Botox alternative hype. Then, freezing wrinkles, molecular mechanics. Third, the skin delivery dilemma. Fourth, the clinical reality. And finally, formulators' secrets and protocols.
Sections 1 and 2. The Botox alternative hype and freezing wrinkles, molecular mechanics. Like we just talked about, tackling dynamic wrinkles means you have to interfere with the muscle contraction signal itself. Normally, neurotransmitter-filled vesicles inside a nerve cell dock right at the cell membrane. They release acetylcholine, which basically tells the muscle, hey, contract. This whole docking process happens at a molecular station called the SNARE complex. A protein called SNAP-25 acts like a bridge, pulling the vesicle and the membrane together. If you manage to disrupt SNAP-25, the muscle never gets the memo to contract. Now here is exactly where Botox and Argireline take totally different routes to reach a similar destination. Botox is a protease, an enzyme that literally cuts and destroys the SNAP-25 protein for good. It is completely irreversible, meaning the nerve cell has to grow a brand new protein. That's why Botox lasts for months. Argireline, on the flip side, is a synthetic peptide designed as a near-perfect copy of one end of human SNAP-25. It essentially competes for a spot in that SNARE complex. If Argireline beats the real SNAP-25 to the punch, it crowds it out. The vesicle can't dock, and the muscle stays relaxed. It's a reversible, competitive inhibition. Once the peptide degrades naturally, usually in hours or up to a day, your normal signaling kicks right back in. Moving to Section 3, the skin delivery dilemma. Understanding how this works on a molecular level is definitely fascinating, but it brings us face-to-face with a massive physical hurdle. For Argireline to do its job, it has to physically reach the neuromuscular junction, which is buried deep down in the dermis. And human skin, especially that tightly packed outer layer, the stratum corneum, is literally evolved to keep things out. In cosmetic chemistry, there's a well-known rule. Most molecules larger than 500 Daltons will just bounce right off the skin barrier. They're simply too big for passive diffusion. Well, Argireline weighs in at 890 Daltons. That puts it squarely in the too big category. So if you're just rubbing a standard water-based serum on your face, the reality is very little of that active peptide is actually reaching its target.
Beyond the headlines.
Into the research. Peptide-proof.
Luckily, science has found some clever workarounds. Research points to 3 highly effective delivery strategies. First up, penetration enhancers. A 2025 study from the Harbin Institute of Technology demonstrated that using an ionic liquid system disrupted the skin's lipids just enough to boost Argireline permeation by 3.1 times. Second is microneedling. A 2026 study out of Yonsei University showed that pairing Argireline with a 0.5 millimeter microneedle pen and a cooling device shot the peptide's penetration up by a massive 1,272%. And third, embedding the peptide into hyaluronic acid-based dissolving microneedles has been proven to deliver the peptide directly into the dermis. The main takeaway here, the formulation and how you apply it matter absolutely immensely. Which brings us to Section 4, the clinical reality. Assuming you actually get the peptide to where it needs to go, what kind of results are we really talking about? Let's step away from the lab mechanics for a second and look at the hard clinical data so we can set some realistic expectations.
The most rigorous data we have comes from a 2026 clinical study by L'Oreal researchers. Over 12 weeks, tracking 50 subjects, a serum containing Argireline, along with a few other ingredients like niacinamide and gluconolactone, delivered some pretty notable results. Static wrinkles dropped by 35 to 69%, though that's largely thanks to the other skin-improving ingredients in the mix. But when we look specifically at dynamic wrinkles, which is Argireline's actual target, the reduction was between 10 and 13%. Now, I know that sounds modest. It's definitely not going to freeze your face solid like an injectable, but for anyone looking for a needle-free way to tackle mild to moderate expression lines, a 10 to 13% reduction is both clinically significant and visually noticeable.
Finally, Section 5, Formulator Secrets and Protocols. Now that you know the science, how do you actually use this stuff effectively? Let's get into some highly actionable advice. Experienced cosmetic chemists and dermatologists have pinpointed a few major anti-patterns, things you absolutely must avoid if you want your Argireline to actually work.
The first massive warning here is all about pH. Argireline has a very narrow sweet spot, staying most stable between a pH of 5.5 and 7. If you apply it alongside low pH exfoliating acids, like AHAs or potent vitamin C serums that drop below 5.0, the peptide hydrolyzes in a matter of days. Specifically, the acetyl cap that protects the peptide from enzymes just falls right off, destroying the peptide before it ever has a chance to reach the neuromuscular junction. So if you're using acids, you need to separate them from your Argireline by at least 20 minutes, or just use them on alternating days. Next up, you have to verify your concentrations and lock in your consistency. The clinical studies that show real, measurable results use Argireline at 5 to 10% concentrations. Be very careful with consumer products that sprinkle in just 0.1% for label decoration. On top of that, you have to understand the timeline. Botox works in a few days. Argireline takes 4 to 12 weeks of strict twice-daily application. The effect is cumulative. Every single application blocks a small fraction of those SNARE sites, slowly dialing down your baseline muscle tension. If you skip days, you essentially reset the whole process. Because Argireline strictly relaxes muscles, it really shines when you put it in a targeted peptide stack. A highly effective routine looks something like this. Use Argireline in the morning to relax your expression muscles throughout the day. Then Matrixyl in the evening to stimulate collagen production and target those static wrinkles. And finally, GHKCU, the copper peptide, used on alternating nights for deeper tissue remodeling. But pay close attention to this warning. Based on 2024 research, Argireline has a strong affinity for copper ions. If you apply them together, the copper binds to the Argireline, which can alter its structure. Always, always separate your Argireline and your copper peptides by at least 12 hours. So the science is clear. It isn't magic. It's competitive inhibition. And with the right formulation and delivery system, it gives you a legitimate, needle-free way to soften dynamic wrinkles. How will you integrate Argireline into your longevity protocol? That's all for this explainer. Like and comment to receive materials from us. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.